Life in Frost Hollow has always been fairly normal, up until a few days ago. My husband and I had small issues and arguments, like any couple, but there was no sign of severe transformations that would escalate into such gruesome nightmare scenes. I always woke up early. The day this all started, I rose around dawn to see the muted gleam of an infant sunrise shining through the window. I looked over to Jack's side of the bed, but found it empty. It appeared unslept in, which I found strange, as he worked the night shift and would nearly always be home in bed by 3 or 4 a.m. But ever since he found our newborn daughter dead in her crib, he'd been acting strange, disappearing at random hours and occasionally bringing a friend home. The people he brought were always young, glassy-eyed guys that I'd never seen before, who often followed him around in an eerie silence, like ducklings following a mother duck. I made a fresh pot of coffee and got out onto the porch as the world came to life. The sun rose overhead like a burning angel, a fiery eye in the vast expanse of cloudless blue. I knew it would be another scorcher of a day, humid, sticky. I watched early morning joggers pass by. I wondered where Jack was. I pulled out my cell phone, checking to see if he had sent me any messages, but there was nothing there. I sat on the front porch, thinking about my fading youth. I had once had hair the color of summer sunlight, but now it was going gray. The small wrinkles around my mouth and eyes seemed to be lengthening and deepening every day. Everything in the world seemed to grow dusty and brittle, like one enormous sarcophagus. I felt certain I would never have another child, never see bright blue eyes staring up at me from that crib again. Far off down the street, there was a strange translucence rippling in the air, like burning heat rising off desert sand. It expanded into a perfectly flat wall. It cut across the trees, homes, and cars, and I squinted, realizing that it was coming nearer with every heartbeat. I thought it was some kind of bizarre meteorological phenomenon, some kind of heat mirage or humidity bubble. As it slowly crept closer, I got bored, pulled out my phone, and read the news. After a few minutes, sitting and people watching, I went inside to make some breakfast. I ambled over to the freezer, looking inside for something edible, maybe some chicken tenders I could deep fry next to some eggs and toast. Instead, I found a decapitated human head, its open, staring eyes glassy and frostbitten. I felt a scream welling up in my throat as I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered, spraying drops of burning hot liquid all over my legs. The freezing mist slunk towards me like ghostly hands, obscuring the face's features for a long moment. I wondered if this was an extremely realistic mannequin head. I looked at the blue lips pressed together as if in an expression of disapproval, saw the ragged patches of black flesh at the bottom of the neck, and knew it was real. Frozen crystals of dark blood clung to the bottom of the head in a black pool, gluing it to the freezer floor and keeping it in an upright position. Between the lips, I saw a piece of paper. On the front, in black cursive, read the words, "To Laura." I hesitated for a couple of heartbeats, then snatched the note from the dismembered head. The lips refused to let it go at first, but I gently wriggled it from side to side. It came loose with a wet sucking sound. The moment I freed the note, a siren rang out from the streets, the volume deafening. It rose and fell in shrill waves for a few minutes. I saw the fridge tremble in front of me under the onslaught of such noise. Black mist slowly began to ooze from every surface. By the time it evaporated a few minutes later, the fridge looked like it had aged 50 years. Enormous rust spots covered the exterior, and the smell of rotting food was instantly overwhelming, like the rancid odor of roadkill putrefying under a burning sun. The rest of the kitchen seemed to have changed as well. Everything had grown old and filthy. The counters were covered in cobwebs and grime. Deep cracks ran through the walls, and the windows were all broken. Turning back to the freezer, I studied the mutilated head's features more thoroughly. It was a woman with raven black hair and blue eyes, probably in her early 20s. Who was she? How had she died? How had her head gotten into my freezer? What was that horrible siren? I unfolded the note, seeing Jack's flowing handwriting there. My heart felt like it stopped in my chest as I quickly scanned the words. Dear Laura, if you're reading this, it means you found the head. It's probably a good thing, I think. There are some things I've kept secret from you and everyone else for a long time. I don't know when it first began, when this fractured piece of my personality gained control. It all started innocently enough, peeking in people's windows when they weren't looking, or stalking random joggers for days without being seen. It was always a rush to get away with it. Soon I would break into people's houses and rearrange their furniture. I'd hide a portable camera in the corner or on the top of a bookshelf to watch their reaction. How I laughed. As you can imagine, it was quite fun. Life doesn't have enough laughter, after all. It seemed like I was wandering across an endless desert sometimes. But eventually I would stumble across an oasis, a resting place in this never-ending life of shit. At least, that other piece of my personality did. You might not believe me, but the first time I killed, it was an accident. Perhaps it was fate sending the first pebbles skittering down the ledge that would inevitably lead to an avalanche. I had been doing my usual routine, breaking into houses, moving things around, sometimes writing satanic messages on the walls in blood. It was all to keep people on their toes, you know, just for chuckles and smiles. But I still always kept my pistol on me. I had walked up and down the street, seeing the mail piling up outside one of the old colonial houses, surrounded by a grove of thick trees. I'd found the house empty when I scoped it out originally. It seemed perfect. So that night, I made my way inside. I remember hearing the front door unlock abruptly in the middle of the night. Tried to run towards the window in the bathroom around back, the way I had come in originally. But the man must have heard my footsteps. He came around the corner with a shotgun, his face beet red. He was screaming and hollering. I was crawling through the window when he started to raise the gun. The ringing sound as he pumped a shell into the chamber was like a scream from God telling me to awaken. At that moment, I knew it was kill or be killed. Before he could pull the trigger, I aimed for his head and fired twice. I remember the rush of pleasure as his face disintegrated into a puddle of blood and bone chips. After that, things started to get a little hazy. First I thought it was a psychotic breakdown because something started wearing my face, following me when I went crawling through the neighborhood. Perhaps it's a part of me in some way, my true self. After all, murder is godly, the pure power of the divine, and killing in the name of God is always mercy, so says the Savior. Well, anyway, I'm rambling. It's time to finish up this letter before I start to sound crazy. We can't have that, can we? What will the neighbors think? The main thing to remember is, don't look behind you. I'll see you soon. I read the last line a few times before it sunk into my mind. Don't look behind you. It didn't make any sense. Then I heard the choked gurgling from the pantry closet. It started low, like the first rumblings of an earthquake. The door was left open a fraction of an inch, one bloodshot eye staring at me through the crack. It flicked quickly to the left and right, the pupil dilating. Insane. Jack? I whispered, feeling sick and weak. What's wrong? I slowly backpedaled towards the front door. The laughter turned into a gurgle, something that might have come from the lips of a drowning man. He flung the door open, his face pale and bloodless, trickles of dried blood covering his arms and hands. Under his fingernails, I saw clotted black gore. Translucent black shadows swirled around his face and chest, spiraling up in a vortex like a dark whirlwind. They shimmered all around him, distorting his features and seeming to increase in intensity by the second. "Jack isn't here anymore," he hissed in a diseased voice. His lips split apart, revealing teeth that looked far too long and sharp. "He's hidden beyond the veil, rotting under the floorboards. Even now, he tries to claw his way up." He stepped towards me, revealing a long butcher's knife in one hand. Its steel stained a deep scarlet. Fresh blood still dripped from the tip. "Stay away from me," I shrieked, glancing behind me. The town looked different now, the streets deserted. Dark shadows danced over everything, as if there was a solar eclipse. The entire world seemed to exhale, a low, diseased hissing that radiated from everything all around me. This strange monster wearing Jack's face continued moving closer, seeming to draw power from the changes. His eyes darkened in a flash, turning black and cloudy. The cyclone of shadows twisted around his body, moving faster, a curtain of darkness so thick it started to obscure his face. "My name is Friend," he gurgled, lunging towards me with the knife. I instinctively pulled away, stumbling back towards the open front door. I felt a cold pain radiating down my left arm, a slashing pain that made my vision turn white with adrenaline and shock. A slash opened up the top of my skin, fresh blood bubbling out instantly. I fell backwards through the door onto the front porch, smacking my head on the wooden porch rail. Friend slunk towards me, a hurricane of blackness with an eerie human pillar at its center. He stared down at me with a grin like a razor blade, letting fresh blood, my blood, drip off the blade and patter gently to the rotted, mold-streaked floor. I kicked forward with all my strength, aiming a blow at his knee. I heard something crack, felt the leg give with a sickening explosion of black blood. The flesh felt loose and spongy, almost boneless. Friend wailed like a banshee, his voice rising into an ear-splitting wail. He fell forward towards me, aiming the knife at my heart, a look of fury darkening his face. A gunshot rang out behind me. A perfectly round scarlet hole appeared in Fred's shoulder. He jerked, twisting and gurgling in pain. Black blood spattered my face and neck. Feeling as cold as dry ice, I rolled away as his body came down. The knife landed only inches from my chest. It quivered there. Its tip stuck deep in the wooden floor. Friend's features changed rapidly in front of my eyes, dripping and melting. The mask of humanity he wore started to fall away, revealing a spinning black hole of a head with a single red eye in the center. Wounded and leaking blood the color of waste oil, he skittered away on all fours. His limbs were skeletal. He was crawling like a spider. His clothes stretched and tightened around his changing, bulging flesh. Breathing hard, I turned to look at my savior. I recognized the withered old face of my neighbor, a man we all called Bones. He had no family that I'd ever seen, and lived a solitary life, almost like a hermit. I had talked to him a few times, been invited into his home even. His walls were covered in the taxidermy heads of animals, black bears and bucks and moose that he had killed. Crossbows, guns, and hunting bows of all kinds had lain scattered over nearly his entire home. He was an outdoorsman at heart. "Bones," I whispered in a choked voice. "Thank God." He shuffled forward, a small, very thin old man with a sunken bird chest. His giant rectangular glasses magnified his eyes to the size of dinner plates, and a white wizard beard hung down to the center of his chest. Jack and I had often joked that he looked like a character from Duck Dynasty. He holstered his pistol around his waist before reaching down a trembling hand and helping me up. "Something's happened," Bones said grimly. "When the siren went off, I was looking outside, just smoking and sipping some black tea, and I saw it happen. Everything started sputtering and shimmering, and this thick black mist rose over the streets and houses. When it finally blew away, I saw this." He waved a hand outside for emphasis, motioning at the apocalyptic scene. The streets heaved in great cracks and fissures, as if an earthquake had rolled through the town. The houses looked like they had survived a nuclear apocalypse. The windows were all shattered, tiny glass shards littering the ground like splinters of diamond. The roofs were peeled away and rotting, with enormous holes eaten into the center of most of them. Something like spider silk covered the dilapidated walls of most of the houses on the street, formed in symmetrical webs that rose 2 or 3 stories high. Behind me, the radio suddenly turned on, the lights flickering overhead. The power all along the street flashed on and off, the street lights outside strobing in an erratic frequency. Something like a metallic shriek ran out through the radio speakers. Bones and I jumped, turning to look backwards at the old radio lying on the kitchen counter. "This isn't the real world," a man screamed over the radio. I immediately recognized the terrified voice of Jack. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Don't believe anything you see here. The anomaly is spreading, Laura. I know you can hear me. I'm sorry for everything. Listen, get out of this. There are a few things you need to remember. First, you should know there's a gateway to this place. Portals that lead back to our world. You can recognize them by the blinding white light radiating from them. It might be a bedroom door, a window, even a kitchen cabinet or a box. They form randomly throughout the anomaly and are highly unstable, often lasting for only a few seconds. If you find one, take it immediately. These are our only ways home. Second, the entity here can take the form of any person or animal, but you'll know them by the shadows that surround them. To kill them, you'll want to go for the crimson eye in the center of their face. Third, there are places with food, water, supplies. They will look like dilapidated gas stations with the name Hell's Market on them. They're safe places where the things on the street don't roam. Don't stay in there too long, though, or you might see Hell. He doesn't like visitors. "Jack, where the hell are you?" I screamed at the radio, running over and shaking it like a crying baby, hearing random pieces inside the old gadget give a metallic rattle, but the speakers only gave a hiss of static as the radio died in my hands. A million thoughts seemed to run through my head at once. Was Jack still alive? Why had his voice come on the radio? Why had his writing been on the note? Bones came up behind me, putting a small hand on my shoulder. "We'll be fine," Bones said. "Jack's a tough guy, but we need to start moving. We can't stay here forever. We're gonna need to find supplies. Everything here is trashed." "It could be worse out there than it is here," I argued. "Why do we need to keep moving? We could barricade ourselves inside and wait for the police and the military and—" "Lady, you're living in a dream world," Bones said coldly, his magnified eyes turning into owlish slits. "We don't know how long we're gonna be here. You don't even know where Jack is. You have zero supplies. Zilch. You could barricade yourself somewhere and slowly starve to death, but that wouldn't help us much." His words made me think. I nodded. "Fine, but we should grab some food and water first," I said glumly, my head spinning. I felt sick and tired from all of this, yet the feeling rose in my chest that I hadn't seen anything yet. Bones gave a faint smile, the corners of his lips twitching as he watched me. I went over to the kitchen sink, turning it on. For a long moment, nothing happened. There was a burping, gurgling sound deep down in the pipes. They clattered and shook as if thousands of rats were sliding through them. The faucet burbled and hissed, frothing dark water. Finally, it spat out a gout of thick scarlet blood all over the rusted sink. squirming with dozens of writhing maggots. I gasped, backpedaling, the smell of iron and rot from the rancid mess sputtering out of the faucet in waves. Repressing an urge to gag, I reached forward and slammed the handle down. "Yup, that was expected," Bones said grimly. He looked around with a blank expression on his face, as if this was nothing more than a stroll in the park. At that same moment, the lights overhead flickered one last time and died. The cracked and broken street lamps outside went dark simultaneously, at least those few that still worked. I went over to the fridge, opening the door. The nauseating smell of rot exploded from the room, hitting me in the face like a slap. I gagged, seeing clouds of black and yellow mold growing over dried, twisted heaps of decaying food. The milk had become a soupy mess in the container, with black tendrils growing along the sides of the exploded jug. I slammed the fridge door shut. I ran over to the front door and stuck my head out, inhaling sweet, clean air. Bones followed slowly behind me, seemingly unsatisfied. "Don't look like we're gonna get any food or water here," he said. "My place ain't any better. When the siren hit and the black mist came, it changed everything. It at it, as if time had been turned on fast forward. By the time the fog was gone, my house was a wreck. The food in the fridge was all rotten sludge, and the cans in the pantry were ready to explode. My guns were all rusted heaps of junk. The crossbows twisted and strings snapped. Some of them had little black spiders building webs on them." "So how'd you get the pistol?" I asked, curious. He looked at me like I was an idiot. "I had it on me when it happened," he said slowly, as if speaking to a mentally deficient child. I nodded, looking around for a weapon I could use. In the living room, I found a metal baseball bat that Jack had brought home years ago. Like everything else, it had been eaten away by the ravages of time. Streaks of dark rust covered the length of it. I swung it a few times, feeling that it still felt structurally intact. "Let's go," I said, following Bones outside. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story? Or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. my time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.